Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us today on our Orbus Live, where we'll be discussing tracking the digital supply chain and what this really means in practice. I am joined today, and it's with great pleasure, to be with a few of our partners, Max, founder of the SDIA, and Vinny, managing director and sustainability enthusiast at Cohen Resnick. Sustainability and sustainable business areas are key pillars for us at Orbus. And it is with true delight that I can be with these two gentlemen today to discuss this. So what are we covering? It's general questions around what is the digital supply chain? What role does IT have in ESG? Who is responsible? Is anyone responsible? Are we all responsible? What does it mean in terms of accountability, in terms of IT, in terms of service infrastructure? What is governance? What should we be reporting? How should we be reporting? And what does it mean for us as customers and enterprises? Now, I do aim to say very little on this call, on this live. And with that in mind, I want to ask for a little introduction from yourselves, Max and Vinny. So over to you, Max, for your elevator intro, please.
Yeah, I promised I will keep it brief. First of all, Natalia, thank you for having us. Thank you for organizing the session. I think it's a topic we can't talk enough about because this question about responsibility and accountability keeps coming up, and I think there's a lot of clarity needed. My name is Max Schulze. I am the founder of the SDIA, a not-for-profit organization working on digital sustainability. I have a background in software engineering myself. I've spent 15 years building software, and Vinny will most likely point out with or without the right purpose at some point. And 3 years ago, I decided that I think there's more we can do with tech, and it's not just building more of it, but also managing the downsides of it in a way that we can have more positive digitalization going forward. And that's what the SDIA and its community is committed to. We are more than 700 individuals, more than 100 organizations, trying to clarify these questions: what to report, who's responsible, what to do, and advocate around it.
Thank you, Max. Very clear. And Vinny?
I'm a civil engineer, and I've been doing it now for about 30 odd years. But back early in my career, I transitioned from engineering focus to technology. Spent some time as a developer, spent some time as a project manager, team leading, grew into an architect, and then when I grew up, I got a real job and started doing strategy and stuff like that for organizations. In the last 10, 15 years, I've been very focused on smart buildings, smart cities, because it's the merging of my original craft and technology. And I think it's very relevant. Like, this conversation today is extraordinarily relevant to this, because there's almost this blindness between, well, we want to be sustainable with our buildings, but we're doing it in a way that we're blind to the sustainable footprint of how we're actually going about it. So I think this is a remarkably appropriate conversation for this.
Brilliant. Thank you, Vinny. Just a bit of housekeeping. Obviously, let's keep healthy discussions, listening to each other. Stay friendly, gentlemen. And also, we encourage everyone to ask questions. So if you are asking anything that comes up, I will be moderating them in the background. We might not jump into those questions straight away, but we will look to cover all of them at the end. So do bear with us. And yeah, let's get this going. So over to you, Max.
Again, I have to say thank you again. And Natalia, nice introduction. I think before we started this live, Vinny, we were touching upon this idea of purpose. So, and you just mentioned it as well in your introduction. What do you think is the biggest challenge in software engineering? Is it the lack of purpose? Is it that we often don't know why we're building software?
I think we know why we're building software, but we're not understanding how purposeful it is and like what's it trying to do. So, you know, we talk. Okay, I'll pull this up. When we talk about a smart building, a smart city, or things of that nature, you know, for the last 10 years, I've seen vendors come along and with the best intent, and they're going to say, "Oh, we're going to put an instrument in here, and we're going to actually measure this, and censor that, and all this kind of stuff." And we got to pull it all back. But what's the purpose of this? What's the value? What's the value you're trying to achieve? And I think this is something that, like, whether you were doing COBOL back in the mainframes in the 90s, or you were doing C++ in the early 90s, or you do whatever, Python, whatever. Now, the fundamental thing you got to go is, what's the value of what I'm doing? What's the intent? Why am I being asked for this? And I think this is a critical thing for any competent programmer to actually get that in their head. So if you take that and elevate it up and you go, okay, three things when we talk about a smart place: people, who's it for? Place, where's it going to be applied? And what's its purpose? What is it meant to do? And once you bring the three of those together, you can say, okay, now I'm going to apply something technically, or some technology approach. It could be complex, it could be simple, but I'm going to apply it in a way that it's actually very, very focused on something. What we've seen, I think, over the last couple of years, and I definitely see it, it's almost like cloud computing has been an extraordinarily liberating event, but it's also been a blinding event, because people are just coding without actually realizing, what you are using compute here. You're using storage here. It's not a case of there is no storage. It's a storage somewhere else. You just don't see it. There isn't the idea of a magic cloud actually isn't true. It's actually there is a disk somewhere, or there is a rare earth mineral somewhere being consumed to store your data. And it's that blindness, it's that lack of visibility that actually has allowed this to happen. So again, purpose is kind of like it's obfuscated, and to the word you're using, responsibility, people don't see or feel the responsibility to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when IT started, right? There was always a constraint. You had to buy servers, and servers to this day are very expensive. A storage system is very expensive. If I want to deploy 100 terabytes of storage for my sensors, that's not something that I can decide, oh, let's do it, right? And you have to explain that. And I think you're right that usage-based billing, especially, and the cloud in itself hiding away that capital expenditure, of course, makes these decisions a lot easier, because it's a click of a button. I have a virtual machine with, 5 terabytes of storage if I want, and I only pay it when I'm using it, right? So I keep spinning up more, and I use more and more resources. Would you feel that who's responsible for then making that decision? So am I, as a developer, when I'm building an application, I spin up that virtual machine? Is it me who has to think like, oh, do I really need it? Or is it higher up, so to say, in the food chain, in the requirements itself?
It's a good question. Well, I've never seen a vendor who actually said, please use less of my stuff, ever. So, let's be honest, whether it's AWS or Microsoft Azure or Google or whatever, they're going to have a disposition, or put you in a disposition that you're just going to keep consuming easily. So therefore, you cannot rely on them. And I'm not being dismissive of them, but they are not going to be the ones who are going to help you be more lean and mean with consuming what they have to offer. So I think the actual development process, the requirement process, and I think even the business process needs to actually start engaging this. And the irony is, this is the critical thing. We're actually, if you're in the smart building or anything, everybody's talking sustainability. I want to collect data about my sustainability. I want to collect, I want to know my carbon footprint. I want to know all these things. And you kind of go, okay, but in doing that, in the action of doing that, do you want to specify how lean you want to be in how you collect it? Because when you think about it, most of your carbon footprint data is quite passive. It's not real-time streaming. It's actually it's like, well, here's my meter reads for the last month. Draw it and hold it. Why does that need to be a 24/7, like high availability, highly redundant configuration, when really all it is a data stream? And there's a lot of things like that that's coming into it, where everybody wants to actually, I want my cloud, I want my stuff, I want all of it in my shopping cart. It's like, it's really about understanding the urgency of the data, understanding the actual redundancy you need in the data, and actually agreeing that, and basically for your CX levels to actually go, folks, your request actually has a carbon footprint of X, or your request actually has a rare earth mineral burden of Y. This is what you're actually asking for, so be mindful in this. And if you start to get that specification coming down from there, well then software developers, to their credit, always respond to the specifications. But if it's not specified, they won't do it.
Yeah, it's classic engineering philosophy. If you set the right constraint, you will get the right result. But I like the point that you made. If I want to gather the data to make a sustainability report for my company, I use a digital tool, but I don't account for that tool. If we would compare that to the construction sector, nobody would say that the trucks and the drills that are being used to build a building, the tools are not part of the equation. Of course, they're part of the equation. But in the digital space, what we see is that the tool itself to get something done is often not accounted for, and everybody says, well, it's digital. How can it have a footprint, right? Digital things do not exist in the physical world. I've had these discussions a lot with really like sustainability experts that said, yeah, but software doesn't exist. And I'm like, yeah, but the resources it consumes are clearly physical. There's an analog to digital converter somewhere, usually called a server, and that thing exists, right? Of course, software doesn't exist, but this physical asset does exist. And I find it fascinating that we keep ignoring the tools. And to the business model itself, of course, if I'm in the business of renting you the tools, my only goal is to increase the utilization rate of my renting business, right? And that's how we have to look at the cloud providers. And it's obvious that they're sending engineering teams to enterprises, helping them build even more applications, helping them digitalize, do a transformation, because that increases the utilization rate of their investment. So it is logical what they're doing, but I think it's often, digital is somehow, every application we're building is somehow considered weightless. And I think that's probably part of the disease in that sense.
And actually, if I may actually put across that, it's not actually just weightless; it's got a shadow, because what we're seeing now is edge computing. So when you, like, again, if we take a building, and you're going to have a control system or an orchestration system for a building, you go, okay, that's a cloud, wonderful, it's weightless. Yeah, but that orchestration system has to have edge computing in the building in case somebody actually slices a fiber backbone and all of a sudden your building goes dark, it goes dead. You can't do that. So now, not are you just, you're already putting the technology in the building that can run the building. And now you're actually putting the shadow in the cloud. And you're kind of going, why are we doubling up on this? Because I'm putting the hardware in there, I'm powering the hardware in there, and I'm putting it in the cloud. So it is this level of, and again, I want to be careful not to actually, I don't want to throw stones at the vendors like Microsoft, whatever. They're providing, they're liberating in what they're doing with the cloud. It's just having visibility of it. It's just people being mindful of it. You know, it's like, you know, cookies are great, but know what calories are in them, because if you don't, you'll be irresponsible. It's just a little bit like that. And that's what we really need on this.
And I think that also ties back into the conversation we had earlier. What's the responsibility of the, so to say, the software people, the IT people? I think it's not necessarily to change so much of their behavior. I think that's always a difficult one, but at least to demand that transparency. So I want to know what's the footprint of my resource usage on your platform, or even if I just use a CRM or something like this, or any software as a service product, I need to know what's the underlying footprint. And I think that's, to me, the real challenge at the moment, that we don't have that information. And it's a bit silly because, yes, you have an industry that thrives on measuring everything that goes out, and it's like, you know, we can put sensors everywhere, data everywhere. But then you ask, so what about yourself? And I was like, oof, that's difficult. And that I find always very ironic. Yeah.
So the other thing I'd actually add to that, when you talk about the developer's responsibility, I remember I worked for I did strategy or IT strategy for a rail company many, about 10, 15 years ago. And as you can imagine, there's a lot of systems inside of a railway company. Like if you think of London Rail or Transport for London, you're going to have your typical business systems, your accounting systems, your HR systems, and then you're going to have operational systems. And what we saw happening was this kind of like conflation of well, we need a server. Well, the grade of server we need is this. No, that's the server you need for operations. It's not the server you need for HR. Okay. And you basically found everything that was going in was platinum grade, and it didn't need to be. Sometimes bronze is good enough to actually get something done. So we came up with this kind of like simple moniker, like minutes for madness. If that system goes down, how many minutes for madness are you? So HR, if the HR system goes down, you have a couple of hours. HR drives payroll, it drives performance management. Okay, you can take a HR server out, and you will survive for a day. The company will stay rocking and rolling and moving along. You can take out the actual accounting system, and you can probably get a day. You probably could get a day. Now, it's not a nice day. It's a lot of unhappy accountants. There's a lot of people screaming about spreadsheets, but the company moves, right? You take out the ticketing system, you're probably about, 5 minutes from madness? I can't buy a ticket. Take out the control system for a train, you're about 10 seconds from madness. So it was a case of actually starting to go, how vital is this? And actually getting that kind of that spectrum of importance across how you think. And that's what we need to do with all of our technology, because everybody assumes, oh, I'm seconds from every system I build is a seconds from madness system. No, it's not. Some systems you can actually genuinely park it for a day and it's going to be fine. So therefore, how you designed it, the redundancy you built in, all of these things can be descaled, descoped. You don't need to actually quadruply load your data and quadruply book your data. If the data is always going to be there, if you're taking a data draw from a known source, like we're sourcing from a known data feed on the web, but why would I need to actually draw and hold that? Why don't I just get it when I need it? Why don't I just draw the data on demand? It's all these behaviors that actually have to come into how the developers behave.
I completely agree with you. I think I actually use a similar example when I'm on stage, always, but a bit funnier. Is if you look at my mom's WordPress blog, which currently runs on a hosted, infrastructure. It's actually, I checked, it's tier 3, the underlying data center. So my mom's blog, even if half of the energy grid would go down, diesel generators would kick in to make sure her recipes are still available to the public. And I think that's there's a beautiful term in it's called over-engineering. And I think that we really need to rethink like what workloads are, which criticality. And I recently came across a bank in the Netherlands that actually started doing this. They tag the workloads based on this criticality rating that you often see also in presentations, like confidential, super confidential, can be public, and these A1, A2, A3 ratings. And based on that, then the infrastructure can only change, right? Because I at the end of the day, I'm always a bit defensive of IT. The IT responds to the requirements of the business. If the business says everything is, life critical, it can never be down, then that's how the infrastructure is going to be designed. I think, though, to your point earlier, there is a responsibility to ask, is that really necessary, right? To not just accept the requirement, but I remember in software engineering there used to be this always ask why when you get a ticket. Don't overdo it, because that I've also seen that people write like entire novels on why this is not a good idea. But asking these questions, I think, is the responsibility of IT. Weaving in maybe this question that came from the audience of what a consumer can do or what an end user can do. I think taking this example of the cookie that you just made, I think it is the responsibility of the user to demand transparency on the footprint of any application they're using. So if I'm a business, then part of my sustainability efforts should be to go to all my suppliers, also my digital suppliers, also my SaaS providers, and say, look, I want to know the footprint of my usage, right? We might be using some chat platform like Slack or MetaMost or something, and I need to send them an email and say, give me the footprint for my usage, because otherwise I think nobody will think about that on the tech side, right? If nobody's asking for it, then nobody will solve that problem. What do you think about that, Vinny?
Look, I think, well, to start with, where do you go right now on Azure to say what's the carbon footprint per gigabyte of storage, terabyte of storage, per cycle of compute? You don't have it. I think at the very least, what we could start doing is actually saying, okay, for every dollar spent on Azure, it's approximately this much. This is, if you can gross it out and say, if you spent $10, this is roughly the actual carbon footprint that's gone with that $10, because you look at the gross revenue and smash it around that way. I think that's a start, as in there's visibility. But I think for consumers to drive behavior, you always go to where the money is, and you basically go to the actual business and say, we are expecting visibility of your digital carbon footprint, and then that will come down to the developers. I think the developers always, and I say this respectfully, haven't been one, they always respond well to the actual specifications and the constraints that have been given to them. So I think there's an element of that's if the consumer wants to drive behavior, it truly is true the revenue to a company, because nothing motivates people better than actually winning and losing customers. And we will respond to that in kind. I will say I think there needs to be probably a little bit of a sanity check on the agilization of the world. Everything is agile now, and everything is a case of, well, I can be creative and just spin stuff out and create more and spin stuff out. It's like, no, whoa, hang on. How about I say you got a finite amount of spin you can do, and you got to make it work. You got to think. You got to stop. You got to actually. So I think the idea of constrained resources has to be actually merged with how agile is done. Because if you go back to agile in the old days, it was for exactly that reason we were agile. It was actually, we were going back to pair coding, C++ or Pascal or whatever it was back in the day. It was because we only had so much power that we could actually have access to, only so much compute space we had access to. So you basically went through, okay, what must we get right? What's the best use of this compute? So everything was done in the mind for, okay, there's a business need and we've got a limited compute. How do we make it work? Now, that then translated into money and time. And it now is a money time thing. But it's a case of, no, hang on, you got to go back and actually start really reintroducing strongly the idea of constrained resources in how we do Agile. Because I have to say, I've never seen, they're probably the guiltiest parties I've seen when you see a company say, oh, we're going to use Agile to do X. Now, it's not always even software. It is literally just spin up more, spin up more, spin up more. Oh, that's version 1. That's on that virtual server over there. That's version 2. And you'll see this explosion of digital consumption. So I think the actual disciplines that we had, and again, I'm showing my age when I say this, but like, you know, when you go back to bad old days of mainframes, DB2, COBOL, whereby you begged the guy next to you for one compute cycle to actually run your COBOL script or run your COBOL code, and it was like that. You lined up. It was like the kids lining up for lunch. You actually got your time on the mainframe to run your code. When you have to do that, you actually are quite specific about what you're doing. You're quite focused on what you're doing. So I think that has to come back into the actual into not just the developer disciplines, but into the disciplines that surround development. And then the other thing I think that goes along with that is, if you remember back in those days, like your security, all your constraining non-functional parts were built into how you code. What you see now is people just code stuff and go, yeah, there's going to be some GDPR tool on the front of that will take care of GDPR. There's going to be some tool on the front of that will take care of security. There's going to be some tool on the front of this. So they basically abdicate responsibility for all these things in how they design code. So I think those disciplines have to come back in. So I think it's back to basics on some of the disciplines that we had. Assume that we have constraints, and if we assume we have constraints, we'll code well to those constraints, and then the efficiencies will drive.
Yeah, there's always professors of computer science that teach me that a lot of the problems are created because it's not just computer scientists building software anymore. It's also people like me, by the way, who is self-taught software developer. I can glue stuff together, but I can't actually optimize things for being fast and things like this, or I couldn't when I was younger.
Can I jump in with a question that we have that's come in and a little bit? I mean, I absolutely love listening in, but I think it comes around the role of responsibility, right? And the accountability. And I think if I was just to put it into sort of my layman's terms of, I can choose to be environmentally conscious with how I purchase or how I travel, right? It's a look and feel, I don't want to use plastic bottles, or I can recycle. So a question that was come in is, how can end users and the consumers help push for more environmental accountability in software engineering? So how do we, or where does that responsibility lie? Or also, what choices can I make as a consumer to start demanding some of this visibility that puts the ownership also then back into the enterprise and the businesses to be more visible with that?
I would say what Max is doing is part of that. So the SDIA organization will, I assume, I'm not pushing responsibility onto you when I say this, but I assume you'll come to the market with some good best practices, some frameworks, some ideas. So, and I think it's a case of over time you evolve those frameworks and you basically go, okay, developed inside SDIA best practices for whatever it may be. I think that's so getting those practices in place. I keep stressing this. Developers are wonderful people. They will always try and solve the problem. You just gotta make it their problem. So I think that's the critical part. You got to make it the problem of the developer to go, you are supposed to deliver this functionality to the business inside this limit. It isn't limitless. So I think there's a start to get that done. I'll go back to what I said earlier on. It's also about driving the business. So when the business writes the specification, that they're actually mindful of this. And, businesses have been quite good in the past, as in they've been stealing stuff out of software and making it their own. So Agile as a concept, as a discipline, I see most of the Agile work now is actually done by business in business. It's a very business term. So, okay, well, now actually let's put something else in there, which is rigor, resource constraint, resource mindfulness. It's starting to bring that language to the business. I think that they're the pressures that can go there. But I think the biggest immediate one is, even if we have to crowdsource this, is to start putting a carbon measure on a per click or per terabyte or whatever for each of your cloud providers. So it's actually evident. Your Instagram 100 pictures is this. Your You know, a terabyte on Azure is this. This is, and that's going to drive two behaviors. One is going to drive awareness of this is what it costs. It's also going to drive behaviors on the cloud providers to provide that in a more efficient way. So, you know, it actually has the benefit of pushing both directions. But I still think we got to get back to being efficient. There's an inherent laziness in actually just consume. And as you know, to Max's point, like it's effectively we're eating food without the calorie count on it, and we're just going, it's okay. There's no calories in this, and that's the problem.
I think that yeah. By the way, thanks. We are literally everything you just described is what we're doing. Also coming up with these measures. I think the challenge is it is a massive risk to the catering firm. Let's put it like this, because at the moment what we see is the narrative is always whenever we, for example, say, look, there is a footprint attached to that. The answer is no, there's not, right? Because it is green electricity. Don't forget about the servers; they don't actually exist. They're just cloud, right? It's just light. It weighs nothing. The future of cloud is fog, so it gets even fluffier. Nobody wants this because it slows down resource consumption, right? Like attaching some kind of guilt to it slows down consumption. And the one thing that's really working well for everybody right now is the growth of that cloud infrastructure consumption. It's making, I would say, a lot of people very happy in terms of shareholder value. And so we are struggling a little bit to make sure that really people get access to that information, and that transparency is really key. And I think actually that a lot of hosting companies and other businesses in the cloud realm would benefit greatly if they would make it more transparent, because the infrastructure would be used in a better way and not just build more and more and more. The other thing you said, Vinny, that I really liked, that I just want to quickly comment on, is this leaving stuff, right? So version 1 is over there, version 2 is over here. I look at it all the time. I don't know if people are aware. I think for Node.js alone, a programming language based on JavaScript or whatever however you want to refer it, there's I think about 7 million plugins. I would argue that most of them are not maintained anymore. I would also say that they're probably not necessary anymore, yet they are all over the internet, and hundreds of thousands of copies of each version. Everything is still there, and I think we do this great ocean cleanup for plastic. I do think that it wouldn't hurt to clean up the internet every now and then of all the stuff we don't need anymore. You know, no offense, Natalia, but even this recording 10 years from now is probably not that useful anymore.
No offense.
So I think there's the internet and digital world is really fast paced, and that's a good thing. We all like that. We all benefit from that. But it also means that there's a lot of, let's say, don't want to call it garbage, but a lot of stuff left behind that people are like, oh, whatever. That just eventually we will die.
I know I said I wouldn't talk, but out of curiosity on this one. So where do the history books then come in, right? So part of the cleaning up the past, all right, don't need to that. I completely agree with you, right? And then we were big about that in terms of the oceans. But if we clean out the internet, right, as you say, sorry, I'm going to tell off the putting notifications on snooze, where do we keep that knowledge if we've cleaned it up? Where do we keep that memory of the past then, to ensure that we don't do it again if it's already there?
Do we print it?
Well, no, I know exactly. It sounds completely hypocritical, and I like it feels silly for even suggesting it. But where does that memory come from? Where does that, in 10 years' time, know that we've come from this to that?
So, can I?
Yeah, just one comment on that. That assumes that everything has value and everything belongs into a library.
Okay,
right?
So nothing. Okay.
I was just Googling if it still exists. Myspace still exists. Do you remember Myspace pages? Yeah. Are they knowledge that we need to archive?
No, I'm very happy with Myspace to be gone. Even Facebook, to be honest with you. Not that I'm having a go at Facebook, but there's stuff on there I could happily live without.
Exactly. Vinny, over to you. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And again, I'm going to throw the parallel into the building space, whereby you stick a sensor in the roof and it's going to ping you data every 5 seconds. Do you need to hold that data every 5 seconds, or do you just need to know the change of data? So, you know, my thermostat sensor is going to feed data every 5 seconds. The only thing I should really know is that it's changed. If it's changed from 21 degrees to 22 degrees, I want to know when it changed. So it's that level of metadata that you need to retain, as in the data change at this point or the information change at this point. That's what history is. History is metadata. It's not data in some ways. So it's like these things happen, but here's the actual context, and that's what metadata is. So yeah, I'm just thinking there's a complete lack of discipline about this idea of redundancy and retirement, and it's time for things to go. Like Myspace. Yeah, I don't even want to know about it. So there's all that, and the other problem with that is not. I never had one, so I'm not a social animal, so I don't do that kind of stuff.
Liar, Vinny, liar. I'm sure there'll be people Googling right now. Yours.
I don't have Instagram, or no. I'm not one of those guys. But I lost this train of thought there. Where was I? I do apologize. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that was my fault. I completely interrupted you there.
No, me too. That was just too good of a joke. Also, DJ Vinny. I can see it. There's maybe connecting it more to the enterprise world, right?
Yeah.
There has always been this idea of legacy applications, and I think there is the sustainability angle, right? What's the footprint of that legacy application? Do we really need it? But then also to Vinny's point from the very beginning, what purpose does this application still serve, right? Do we need 2 mainframes running for an application that has 3 users? And I think connecting these usages, the purposes, the business value to infrastructure is something that also a lot of CFOs in the past, right? So there's also a responsibility there. I said, you know what, the cost of the IT infrastructure is so low compared to the total business value that we get out of it, but that was never actually measured in numbers, right? This was always just, we spend 100 million on IT, but our business is 10 billion annual revenue. It's just it's a small ratio. But I think given that our society is resource constrained because the planet has boundaries, everything needs to be reevaluated against that, and ultimately leads to cost savings. It leads to a more efficient, a leaner business, probably a more agile organization with less legacy applications. And I think it's overall a good thing. It's just nobody, in my experience, especially in IT, likes cleaning up old stuff, right? I prefer to build new stuff with new technology and not fix or migrate old things. But maybe it's time to have these conversations. Like, what can we turn off? What do we still need?
Actually, the thought just came back to me. What was in the front of my head before I interrupted myself thinking about social media. And it is exactly to the point that Max is making, but to the other level, which once you start to clean up, your search becomes easier. So if we have 20 versions of the truth, well, what's the truth? So just even there is a sustainability aspect to this, which is huge, but there's also a reality of we should be responsible for sustaining the actual quality of the data by actually getting rid of the redundancy, getting rid of the rubbish, getting rid of the 20 versions. And this goes back to any code or any document. Like, just look at your email when you're actually putting a proposal out, back forth, draft 1, draft 2, draft 3, draft 4, right? Even the fact that we have a document, when you think about a document, it's a manifestation of all this information into one place, into a package that actually has a significant footprint in size. Why do you need that? Why can't we just edit? Why can't you just edit your lines and assemble the document as a report at the end? So it's all these approaches that actually have to change. But the biggest problem, I think, with the clean the ocean, clean the internet, is you don't even know what the truth is anymore, and then you need more compute to find the truth, because now you got to actually compute for truth. So these are some aspects of how we actually have to approach it as well.
Yeah, I think the underlying disease that when that statement came out, I thought it was so inappropriate. Is data is the new oil. I think it was originally some business magazine, Forbes or something said it. And I thought, well, the first question that I would ask, first, who owns the biggest pipelines and the biggest refineries? Because if you have, and this, to the credit of Google, they have managed to build the world's largest database that exists, right? And that's a database you can query in milliseconds. And everybody who's in software engineering knows how difficult that is to build something like that. So yes, data is oil for Google because they happen to build the world's biggest refinery. And now every corporation, every building owner thinks that their data is also oil, but they are not realizing that oil is worth nothing if you don't have pipelines, so strong fiber connectivity, which most countries still don't have, as well as owning a gigantic refinery. And then you can turn it into products. And I think if everybody on this planet thinks that they will have an infrastructure like Google to do something with data, there's not enough space on this planet to put all these servers there, right? And I think we need to realize that, no, Coca-Cola is probably not going to be a data company. They sell drinks, right? And maybe data enabled some part of their business, software enabled some part of their business, and that's great. And analytics can help with that. But they probably don't need to retain everything they've ever done for the next 500 years, right? To Vinny's point. And I think that data is not oil. Data is literally a communications means between software applications and a storage mechanism, but it doesn't mean it's infinite, nor does it have infinite value that we just haven't found yet. And AI will show us what in my Word documents that I have on my desktop, where the value is, right? I think that's an illusion.
It reminds me of the old what is data, what's information, what's knowledge, and what's wisdom. And information is what's it? No, information is a tomato. Knowledge is knowing that it's a fruit, but wisdom is knowing not to put it in a fruit salad. That kind of level of thing. So it's that kind of thing, and it's the wisdom we want. It's not always the data. And people conflate that and say, "Oh, I want all this data." Not really. You want the wisdoms that are extracted from that, but it's not always about the data. The other thing I think that's actually, and I want to just cycle back to this because we said it and I kind of left it there, was sure your center is green and it's renewable energies, whatever, but that renewable generation could be put to better use. It's not like just because you're green, just because your power is green, doesn't mean it doesn't have that has like there is a finiteness to how much green power we can create in the world. There's a finiteness to everything that we do. So that's not an excuse to say, well, we're not burning carbon to get here. No, but you are consuming some of the finite power that's available to us. So it's something we shouldn't forget either. And the one thing that I don't think we're stressing enough is rare earth minerals is a big deal. The extraction of, the mining of, the processing of has significant footprint. So we cannot be dismissive of that either.
Not just environmental footprint, also social footprint.
Yeah.
If people are still not aware, minerals are usually not mined by adults around the world. If you look at almost every report that the United Nations has put out on that. And servers are not made from love, wood, and recycled materials either. To this point, last time I checked, at least. I'm a bit mindful of time. There were a few points that Natalia, you highlighted in the beginning. So what's the role of IT in ESG? I think we answered that. Is the reintroducing resource constraints in an organization and being the one saying, hey, can we reduce our own footprint, right? I think that was a very important point. I think, Vinny, maybe on the accountability point, who's accountable, who's responsible? Maybe you want to recap that real quick?
Yeah, I think there is disciplines that have to be brought to bear inside the development community. And I think that is the community itself and people like yourself bringing that to bear. I think there is awareness and visibility to the consumer in ways, and pressure coming back onto the company. So somebody telling Coke, guys, leave it. Don't. This is what we want. We want less of that footprint. So it's basically the consumer putting pressure on the actual businesses, and then the providers of platforms giving visibility, and then the actual developers being mindful. But again, I believe in the developer community because they have always responded to the pressures if the pressure is brought to bear.
Completely agree, and my job is to create that pressure, so that we're good on that.
It's all our jobs
exactly
on that one.
The on the reporting side, I think it's always a difficult question because the answer is not report all CO2. Yeah. I think there were 2 points that we made that are really important. One is report the actual footprint and not the, so to say, already how do I say this in a friendly way, the certified and offset version of it. Just show how many resources really went into making this application or the usage that you're creating. And I can always point people at the same thing. For physical product, it's very easy. That's called a life cycle assessment. We don't do that for digital products yet, but in there is all the metrics: how much water it consumes, how much CO2 it creates, how much energy goes in, how many rare earth minerals and metals go in, as Vinny pointed out. These frameworks exist. They don't need to be invented. And if every digital product would have an LCA, a life cycle assessment, we would know. But to this day, we don't have that. So if people are thinking about what should I report, look at those metrics. I think that's the truth that the world has already agreed on, that that's what we want to report for every physical product. So why would it be different, I think, for a digital product? Is there anything we missed, Natalia, from your points in the beginning?
I mean, I think you've covered those broadly, but I think it's opened a lot more questions as well, and potentially further episodes that we can all do together. We've had a comment come in. Data is only information in the right context. Without context, it remains data, which I think is a nice way to summarize that. Look, gentlemen, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for being a part of our alliance and partnership at Orbus. There's obviously a lot more I hope we can do with yourselves, and we can keep this conversation going. But from my point, as somebody who's worked in a bit of sustainability in the past and what I bring it to Orbus, the time is now, right? And if anything, it's about making positive impact and making that positive change. And hopefully we can all do that in our own separate streams as well, and come together like this and share best practice and debate it, and hopefully bring it out to a wider audience, even if it's in a couple of months' time on demand. And then I promise to delete it accordingly as well. And then Max, I couldn't tell if you were joking about your mother's recipes rather, but very keen to see how good those are, if they're going to be around for years too.
I will personally archive them on the
internet. Good to hear. All right, thank you both. Enjoy your evening, Vinny, or get to sleep. And Max, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks everybody
for having us.
Ciao. Bye.